The explosions and the sickness in his body after he set the phone down were unbelievable. His bones were racked with every kind of pain, cold and hot, he had ever thought of or experienced in his wildest nightmare. He swallowed all of the aspirin he could find in an effort to stave off the assault. But when the doorbell finally rang an hour later, he could not move. He lay weak and exhausted, panting, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Come in! Come in, for God's sake!" M. Monagan came in. Thank God the door was unlocked. Oh, but Mr. Harris looked terrible. M. Monagan stood in the center of the living room, small and dark. Harris nodded. The pains rushed through him, hitting him with large iron hammers and hooks. M. Monagan's eyes glittered as he saw Harris's protuberant bones. Ah, he saw that Mr. Harris was now psychologically prepared for aid. Was it not so? Harris nodded again, feebly sobbing. M. Monagan still whistled when he talked. Something about his tongue and the whistling. No matter, though. His shimmering eyes, Harris seemed to see M. Monagan shrink, get smaller. Imagination, of course. Harris sobbed out his story of the Phoenix trip. M. Monagan sympathized. This skeleton was a traitor. They would fix him once and for all. "Mr. Monagan," sighed Harris faintly, I never noticed before, but your tongue, round, tube-like, hollow, my eyes, delirious. What do I do?" M. Monagan whistled softly, appreciatively. Coming closer, Mr. Harris would relax in his chair and open his mouth. The lights were switched off, and Monagan peered into Mr. Harris's dropped jaw. "Wider, please." It had been so hard, that first visit, to help Harris, with both body and bone in revolt. Now he had cooperation from the flesh of the man. Anyway, even if the skeleton protested in the darkness, M. Monagan's voice got small, tiny. The whistling now became high and shrill. "Now, relax, Mr. Harris. Now!" Harris felt his jaw pressed violently in all directions, his tongue depressed as with a spoon, his throat clogged. He gasped for breath. Whistle. He couldn't breathe. Something squirmed, corkscrewed his cheeks out, bursting his jaws like a hot water douche. Something squirted into his sinuses. His ears clanged. "Ah!" shrieked Harris, gagging. His head, its carapaces riven, shattered, hung loose. Agony shot fire through his lungs. Harris could breathe again momentarily. His watery eyes sprang wide. He shouted. His ribs, like sticks picked up and bundled, were loosed in him. Pain. He fell to the floor, wheezing out his hot breath. Lights flickered in his senseless eyeballs. He felt his limbs swiftly cast loose and free. Through streaming eyes he saw the parlor. The room was empty. "M. Monagan! In God's name, where are you? M. Monagan, come help me!" M. Monagan was gone. "Help!" Then he heard it. Deep down, in the subterranean fissures of his body, the minute, unbelievable noises, little smackings and twistings, and little dry chippings and grindings and nuzzling sounds, like a tiny, hungry mouse down in the red-blooded dimness, gnawing ever so earnestly and expertly at what might have been but was not. A submerged timber. Clarice, walking along the sidewalk, held her head high, and marched straight toward her house on St. James Place. She was thinking of the Red Cross as she turned the corner and almost ran into this little dark man who smelled of iodine. Clarice would have ignored him, if it were not for the fact that as she passed he took something long, white, and oddly familiar from his coat and proceeded to chew on it, as on a peppermint stick. Its end devoured, his extraordinary tongue darted within its white confection, sucking out the filling, making contented noises. He was still crunching his goody as she proceeded up the sidewalk to her house, turned the doorknob, and walked in. "Darling," she called, smiling around. "Darling, where are you?" She shut the door, walked down the hall and into the living room. "Darling!" She stared at the floor for 20 seconds, trying to understand. She screamed. Outside, in the sycamore darkness, the little man pierced a long white stick with intermittent holes, then softly, sighing, his lips puckered, played a little sad tune upon the improvised instrument, to accompany the shrill and awful singing of Clarice's voice as she stood in the living room. Many times as a little girl, Clarice had run on the beach sands, stepped on a jellyfish, and screamed. It was not so bad finding an intact gelatin-skinned jellyfish in one's living room. One could step back from it. It was when the jellyfish called you by name.